'Cause Atticus Health will make you feel alright.
I'm Ilana Razbash, and this is Radio Architecture.
Good evening from beautiful Bunurong country. We are broadcasting to you live from the unceded lands of the Eastern Kulin Nation, live right here from the Karam Swamp. As always, you can join the conversation. Text us in the studio on 0493 213 831. We'd love to have you with us. Tonight is also the 90th broadcast of Radio Architecture with Ilana Razbash, and I'm so excited to have in the studio my guest, one of the original architects who was on the radio, on our kind of sister and well-known radio station in Melbourne, another community radio station. Show ran for a whole decade, and it's truly an honour to have another one of the architects with me, joining me for a conversation here tonight. It's Rory Hyde. He's a designer, curator, and writer based in Melbourne. His work is focused on new forms of design practice for the public good and redefining the role of the architect today. He's Associate Professor in Architecture, Curatorial Design and Practice at the University of Melbourne. From 2013 to 2020, he was the Curator of Contemporary Architecture and Urbanism at the Victoria and Albert Museum and a design advocate for the Mayor of London. His books, including Future Practice in 2013 and Architects After Architecture 2020. Welcome to the program, Rory.
Thanks, Lana. It's fun to be here and doing architecture on the radio again. Love it.
How did your summer season go?
Oh, it was so much fun getting the gang back together. So we did the show for 10 years. You know, I was like 18 when we started it. And then we took 10 years off and then we came back for 6 shows. And it was just like the old times, just like we never left. Same studio was exactly the same. Yeah.
And it's a beautiful analog studio there as well on VBS. It's a bit different to what we do.
That's right. None of these lights and buttons. No, it's all dials and yeah, it's exactly analog is it. Real CDs. You can still play vinyl in there. It's great. Yeah.
Wonderful. There's a question I like to ask all my guests on the program to get the conversation started, and that's, what's your earliest memory of a building or place?
Oh, good question. Well, the earliest proper architecture memory, I think, is maybe when I was 16 or something, you know, like probably not super young. It's not like I was 2, I don't know. And driving up would have been Little Latrobe Street towards the RMIT building by Edmund and Corrigan, which had just been built. This is the one.
Building 8, yeah.
Building 8 on Swanson Street, which has different coloured tiles and postmodern bits that stick out and
palm trees and Ned Kellys.
Exactly. All of these sort of references. And I remember in the car with Mum and I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Oh, you know, quite dismissive. Yeah, this new building. You know, don't worry about that." But the the seed was planted. I couldn't, you know, get rid of it. And then, yeah, it sort of got onto architecture from there. But it's funny because I ended up studying that building, and it was the first time I really properly paid attention to something because it was so weird and strange and peculiar and unusual.
And it starts that conversation. You know, Federation Square, for example, right, provoked all sorts of reactions, and it was weird and was unusual and different, but it got people talking about architecture.
Yeah, that's right. And I think those buildings, that one and others by Edmund and Corrigan, you know, they do stretch the bounds of good taste. And so for that reason, yeah, people love to have a discussion. I was actually in a long text message argument with a friend in Sydney about the National Museum by Ashton Reagan McDougall in Canberra. You know, he hated it. I was defending it. But, you know, we were still talking about it 25, 30 years after it was built. So there's something in it.
Definitely an amazing building. And local listeners would also know Edmund and Corrigan's Keysborough Church of the Resurrection, just down the road from here.
Oh, true. Exactly. Very good. So and what they did, of course, is tap into the suburbs, tap into a different kind of Melbourne that was more, local, less looking towards Europe, but appreciating the types of buildings that people lived in not in the centre. So,
and it fits in perfectly. Funny enough, on that road, there's now so many different religious and spiritual institutions, and some have also weird and wacky buildings. And that whole area of Keysborough and all the way through has just become a series of churches and temples.
Amazing.
Almost kind of prophetic in this vision from Edmund and Corrigan.
Yeah, that's right. It's this sort of turn the volume up type of architecture. So I haven't seen it recently, but I'll have to go and have a look. It sounds great.
What was a really big aha moment for you as a student?
The whole thing. So I studied architecture in the early 2000s at RMIT, and, I wasn't a great student in high school, but like as soon as I arrived, it was like I found my thing and I found my people, and everything clicked and everything made sense, and I've just loved it since then. I've done architecture in all sorts of different ways, whether studying as in practice, radio, curating, and now as an academic, and writing and all sorts of different things as well. The thread though is architecture, and I've just always loved using that as a way to think about the world.
That eternal constant.
Yeah.
I'm curious about your time in practice. What kind of inspired you to want to push away or step out that conventional pathway?
Yeah, so I started working in offices while I was a student and worked on big things and small things. So I worked on the northern stand of the MCG with a coalition of practices in the city, and I was making a big model, and we worked on it for months and months, and then they showed it on the news, and Jeff Kennett pointed at it, and we were like, yeah, there's our model, and then worked on houses in other smaller practices, and sort of lots of different things in between. So I loved learning the craft and being part of a team and being in the office. Meanwhile, I was buying those expensive air freight magazines from Europe. So magazine called Volume, or it was called Arcus back then before, and it was super weird, super theory driven. At the end of an article, the designers would put a page which you could tear out and write feedback and fax it to the author. So it was also about feedback and things before the internet. And I just thought, this is so weird, this is so interesting, and got the kind of ideas and architecture as ideas bug, really. So I ended up doing a PhD and then went to work for that magazine that I'd always idolized as a student.
Oh, wow.
And that led to my time in Europe. But yeah, so... and also the radio show that we started around the same time was a similar thing. You take the images away from architecture, you take the forms, the kind of photographs, the what we used to think of as the products of architecture, and you're left with the ideas, the conversations, the efforts at stretching things, the connections, the places. And I realized that we talked a lot about architecture as a product, as buildings, but it was this bigger thing, and it included all of those ideas and conversations and publications and people, and to try to stretch that understanding of what architecture is. Yeah,
that's exactly right. Architecture is about ideas, and we often really keep coming back to that point on this conversation, how important the ideas are, the world that you're creating in your cities, in your life, in public life. In being all together. How was that time on working on the magazine, that dream come true moment?
Oh yeah, it was like literally a crazy dream come true. I arrived in Amsterdam. I had a letter of introduction from somebody who, distant connection who'd just been on a crit for me, who I knew had a connection to the magazine. I was sleeping on a friend's floor, and I'd been there for like 2 weeks in Amsterdam, and I had a one-on-one meeting with Rem Koolhaas, who was looking for someone to work on his new project, and they sort of connected me.
That's the Stark Tech Director of OMA.
Yeah, my literal hero, the sort of biggest architect in the world at that time. Then it ended up working for him for the next few years on another big publication. So it was it's like, does everyone who arrives in Amsterdam get to meet the master?
Absolutely not. This is a wild story.
Yeah. So that was completely crazy. And then I was right in the deep end and stayed there for years and years. Yeah.
And you got the publication bug, and continuing down that path of expansive ideas, you never felt a yearning back to buildings? And
Yeah, I mean, good question. The two things always never fully superseded one another. So, one way I think about my various steps is I'll have the main thing and then the side project. And at some point, the side project becomes the main thing, and then a new side project appears. And
they leapfrog each other.
They sort of leapfrog each other. So all during that time in Amsterdam, I certainly didn't feel like I'd left practice, and I was doing working on different projects with different people, and even in that office I was doing different bits of design. I did a few interiors for Australian expats who I'd met over there, a couple of houses on the side type thing, and then went in my next job I was back being a proper architect again. So it's sort of dancing around between different ways of doing architecture. Yeah.
Or charting that map, charting that early beginnings of your book, really, in that first experience.
Well, that's right. I mean, that first book, Future Practice, it's got a sort of long history, which is in my PhD and thinking about practice, which is what it was about when I did it here in Melbourne. But it more came out of the frustration I had with the way that practice was organised and the way that architecture was thought of in Rotterdam, which was, let's send 30 people loose, like students with very little skill or thought, come up with like dozens of different ideas, and then somebody will come along and put a circle around 2 or 3 of them, and then we take those down, we develop them further, and we do it all again the next day. And it was just this kind of, sausage machine of thoughtless production.
It's unimaginable almost.
And in terms of wasted effort, long nights, carelessness. So having idolized these architects and looked at their books and pored over every design, I got there and realized this is just this sort of wasteful mess. There's got to be another way. Ended up having arguments with people like, this is an architecture. Like, what if we just had 2 people who were thoughtful? Maybe we'd get further than 20 people being lost. So back and forth on the train. I was living in Amsterdam, studying, working in Rotterdam, and I started writing this sort of angry manifesto, which turned into something more generous. But it started out as like a rejection of that mode of practice, which I was so repulsed by.
Got you fiery, got you passionate. Yeah. They say never meet your heroes. Was it definitely the case in that instance?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. Students ask me, should I go and work for these practices? I've got this opportunity for an internship. And I think, go do it. Like, see and learn and take what you can, extract what you can from it. But the moment you feel you're being exploited, like, leave. Because you're worthless to them. And so just extract and take what you can get. It's very hard to get that type of experience here in Australia. So I don't regret it. Loved all of it and what it taught me. And also perhaps I'm grateful to it for giving me something to kick against and for being able to then articulate my alternative position, which I was then able to put into future practice. Yeah.
Quite the trajectory it's set up for you. I'm wondering, what advice do you have for students who are grappling with a lot of side projects at once, or even anyone really? I think it's very much the culture of the times to have side hustles and side projects, and people who are juggling a lot of things at once. Yeah,
great. I mean, great question. I think that the side project is so important, especially if you're working for somebody else. You can lose your own brain in a way. You become so good at, let's say, echoing or taking on and embodying the spirit of the practice and of those other people. You become a really good employee. Yeah, well, and you lose what's distinctive about your own voice and your own hand. So I think the side project is the place where you can continue to nurture and keep alive your own ideas, because that's the thing that drives you. I mean, I teach now, and I've got a bunch of students that I'm working with at the moment. They're working towards their final projects in a few weeks, and I mean, the whole of a design school, I think, is a place to work out what kind of a designer you are. Are you going to be doing nice houses or doing socially engaged community practice, or do you want to go to Europe, or do you want to go to Vietnam and get your hands dirty? Like, being able to articulate that by the time you get to the end of your degree, instead of just responding to what we tell you to do. Like if you, that's the urgent job of a student, is to work out what kind of designer you want to be.
Absolutely. That's the urgent job of a student. I just really want to echo and repeat that exact phrasing. It is so, so important. Finding that path, finding that trajectory in your own voice, because that's a creative act. Finding your own voice. And architects sometimes forget we're also creative. Maybe not necessarily everyone's an artist, but there's still that artistic thread and there's artistic and creative energy.
Yeah, that's right. And when I say own voice, it doesn't need to be a formal, spatial, artistic.
Doesn't have
voice.
To be a manifesto on the train.
No, it can be, I realize I'm really good at writing briefs, or I realize that I'm really good at the sort of programmatic, or I love technical details, or I love working in teams, collaborating, or I love the very start of a project where we're coming up with the concepts. If you can work out which bit that you love and then to develop that and nurture it and keep it alive, then that's it always sounds so motivational when I say it, but I really mean it. Like it's literally, this is your job. Yeah.
Well, I think it's universal advice that it's always said that you should specialize. You should find something that is your niche, your passion that you can specialize in and push ahead and push forward, through.
And I think that will carry you for, I don't know, these things. I look at the graduating thesis projects and I think there's 10 years of ideas there. You can run with that. But then again, the next side project should start to slide in beside it. And I'm a big fan of changing your mind and of leaving behind your old self as well.
It's like a tree, I'm saying, and maybe it's not a leapfrog anymore. Maybe it's a tree, and it's just you never know which branch is going to run taller and further and be
exactly.
that longer
That's a
one.
nice big picture.
Nice extended metaphor. We'll run with that one. So then after Rotterdam, after meeting your heroes, kind of popping all those illusions, how did the rest of Europe go?
Oh, I mean, amazing. So again, the next side project sort of started to slide past. We went to Venice as a radio show as part of the Australian Pavilion in 2012. And that was, felt like, okay, let's make an exhibition. Let's kind of do what we do there. We did a week of live interviews and handed out little radios so that people could walk around the Biennale listening to us. We made stickers which had the frequency printed on it and an aerial so it was live broadcast like a pirate radio station within the Biennale.
That's incredible.
that was amazing fun, grabbing people by the collar as they walk past, like, there's Jean Nouvel, get him, or this. Whoever who
was the biggest architect you interviewed in that week?
Oh, good question. Toyo Ito, I think.
Wow.
Yeah. Everybody's there for that opening. We've got photos of him sitting on our radio trolley, and it was good fun in that way. And then also in Amsterdam, I co-curated an exhibition with an artist friend at a design gallery, and that really gave me the curating bug.
Was that the first venture into curation?
Yeah. So we did a speculative design show. Liam Young, the Australian designer, was in it. All sorts of other friends of ours from there. We took over a big warehouse and made these big installations, opening a new one every 2 weeks. Still a show that I'm really proud of in terms of the naive energy of it.
That's a real feel sometimes, isn't
it?
And
then use that basically as my business card for the next job, which was at the V&A. And then went and was the architecture curator there for almost 10 years.
Incredible. There are so many parallels between architectural practice and curation, but I'm wondering if you can explain what is the strongest one there for you.
Yeah, I really think that architecture is a great training ground for curation. So first of all, it's the combination of the spatial and the, narrative.
The ideas.
The storytelling aspects of architecture and considering, a journey. What do you know or what don't you know at the start? What do you want people to know at the end? All those sorts of really basic things which architects do without really thinking or being clear and articulate about it. It's very project focused, especially if you're working on exhibitions which are temporary as opposed to, let's say, permanent collections which have a different kind of metabolism around them. But things like, all the project stages are pretty much the same from concept to design development to detail to opening. Deadlines are hard, which is exciting compared to buildings, although sometimes deadlines are hard too there. And then they, surprisingly, things take about the same time. Like a big exhibition, and I only worked on really 2 big ones in my 10 years and lots of small ones, but each one of those takes 3 or 4 years from start to finish.
Yep, that's about a building.
Which is like a big building, $3 million, £3 million budget for a big exhibition, sort of also like a medium-sized complex building with dozens of all very similar consultants and advisors and people. And as the curator, a lot like the architect, you're the one holding the idea and you're the one defending it from the invaders and the people who want to cut budgets in the wrong place and people who want to use it for their own ends. And you've got to stay tight to that concept and be the one then on the day of opening to stand in front of the press and tell everyone, your concept and how clear it is.
What it's about and what it means.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So all of those things, I think, I felt that not even, on the one hand, imposter syndrome,
really,
beginning a job
even in that role,
beginning a job in a huge institution, never having worked in a museum before, but all equally felt well prepared because I had this design experience, which was easily translatable. Yeah.
And an immense portfolio and an immense credibility. It's not that you fell off the street to be an A.
Well, no, it felt like a long shot. Yeah.
How did you get over the imposter syndrome?
Oh, by working really hard and by trying to learn everything, but also by being surrounded by an amazing team. I mean, that place is just or it was rather, I don't know if it still is, certainly our department, not what it was anymore, but, imagine 20 of like the coolest, smartest, funnest, brightest, youngest, most interesting people from around the world, and putting them in one room and saying, we're going to tell stories and we're going to take 3 years to tell them, and we're going to all work together in this like totally overlapping collaborative way. When I left, it was like leaving half of my brain in London because of all of the sort of shared ideas and conversations that we were building together. Yeah.
Wow.
It was an amazing place. Yeah.
So
really lucky to have worked there. There's very few, I think, moments in your working life where you get to be in a place like that. Yeah.
I remember visiting the V&A actually during that time, and I come into the architecture section, and I was so surprised to see a corner of Sean Godsel's Building 100 design hub component just sitting there. Oh!
So was I. I was very surprised to see it too. You may assume that it was me who put it there.
Who put it there?
It was not me. It was my predecessor, and the day I arrived, they were installing it. And I said, what the hell is this?
Why is it here?
Why did this building follow me from Melbourne? And I'm not a huge Sean Godsell fan either. I wouldn't have put it there. But nevertheless, I had to write the label and interpret it and talk about it on tours.
And that's what happens in a museum too. You do inherit some of that cultural legacy.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I spent 10 years writing alternative proposals for that gallery because I felt that it was quite stuffy and it didn't really have a clear narrative. And but I wasn't successful in being able to change it, and it'll probably be there for another 20 years.
What was the dream direction? If you could imagine,
oh, really good question.
If you could have sent it anywhere, what would have been the absolute goal amongst the stars?
I mean, the way that it starts is there's a house. And it's kind of cut into 2 directions, and it says, this is a plan, this is an elevation. And then the rest of the gallery is really about the kind of products that architects create. As in, this is a model, this is a drawing, this is a perspective, this is a rendering. And it treats architecture as the things that architects make in their offices. Yeah. And I never thought that that's what architecture is. So I wanted to recenter the architecture as something which emerges out of dialogue and conflict and politics and people and social movements. So, you take something like the Sydney Opera House, and they've got these amazing models of the Opera House from Jornitz and that you could tell the political fight to keep Utzon on the project when he was getting sacked by the New South Wales government. You can tell the incredible engineering story about how Arup solved the construction challenge of the shells. You can tell a story about publicness and opera and what it means to be in a space like that in just pure form. You can tell a story about Australia's emerging into a kind of cosmopolitan future, no longer a backwater, an opera house as the sort of declaration of our independent voice, separate from England as our own country. You can talk about architecture, So take a building like that and slice it in all different ways. And I wanted to basically do that 10 times, like take 10 really powerful moments in architectural history and unpick the different ways that you can look at it. Yeah. Anyway, that was a dream. Unfulfilled.
Do you think it could happen here? Do you think we might have an architecture museum?
Yeah, that's a good question. I came back with a sort of fire to get some energy behind that idea. And there's other people who share that way of thinking. So Kate Goodwin, who was the curator at the Royal Academy, came back from London also at the same time, having done, a huge amount of experience working with the amazing collection and exhibitions there. We've talked about it a lot. South Australia, at the university, they have a collection, but they don't have a public museum. Different organisations have quite good collections, the Boyd Foundation, the state libraries, the so-and-sos. But
RMIT Design Archives.
Exactly. But there's really no place where this story is told. It kind of falls between the cracks in Melbourne anyway, between, let's say, Melbourne Museum, which is brilliant and has a lot of social history and history of Melbourne and the city and so on, but it's not so much about, let's say, buildings, more urban. And then the NGV, which occasionally works with architects, or they have their summer pavilions, they have little exhibitions, but it's so much more art and the artifact.
Yes.
So I think there's something missing in between, which tells this big, interesting public story. And
Which part of the city would you put it in?
Good question. Probably somewhere else.
Oh, really? A completely different precinct, not somewhere in South Bank, not somewhere in Carlton or Parkville.
No, it should go in Footscray, or it should go in the west. There's very few cultural institutions in the west, and the ones that are there but punch above their weight. And I think adding a bit more momentum behind that energy would be a great way to kind of coalesce another cultural hub. Yeah, no more South Bank, no more Footscray.
Perhaps somewhere in the west with a good view of the city skyline.
Yeah, that's right.
Just
that
to show up that proximity.
Exactly. Perfect. That would be a great sort of instructional tool to be able to draw on the glass and explain the way the city evolved. Exactly. You don't need to be, I don't know, in the tourist centre. That's one of my feelings about museums is, they're more or less always conceived around an imagined tourist visitor, when actually there's a big responsibility for them to tell local stories and to make sense of the places and the things where we live. And if you start from that perspective, the west is the biggest growing part of the city. It's the place where a huge proportion of new migrants arrive. It's where the biggest urban challenges are. I mean, to use that as a base to wrestle with those questions in an active way rather than just in a reflective way, as in, let's show all the old things we collected from the city. No, this is a place which says, how are we going to solve transport? How are we going to, what type of new dwellings and ways of living do we need to develop for this to change demographics? We're living in the same houses that we've been for, since the 1950s. And, we need a place that can host those discussions to challenge and change them.
And bring in and elevate all those new ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
So important.
I'm getting excited about it.
I'm
maybe we put it back on the agenda.
We'll just send them through this conversation.
Exactly, yeah.
Before we leave the topic of Europe and London, I'm wondering if there are any big lessons from that more than a decade really of being abroad that you've taken back with you that are still with you to this day. Because many go overseas and they think it's going to solve all their problems.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to teach them everything they need to know. But I wonder if there is a core lesson for you that is still with you.
Oh, I mean, what I learnt at the V&A is really, and in those practices that I mentioned in the Netherlands, is doing things properly, and the care and expertise required in order to do that. There's moments that you see that here, and then there's a lot of what Robin Boyd, the great mid-century architect, used to call "she'll be right."
It's a disease.
I think Australia is still ruled by "she'll be right, mate," and it's not good enough. We can do better.
No, we absolutely can do better. We must do better. I've just gone back from Singapore.
Oh,
Talk about an example of expecting the best from people and a whole society and demanding great outcomes and pushing for them, and none of this lowest common denominator, none of this "she'll be right" attitude.
Exactly. And I mean, I haven't been to Singapore properly for a long time, but what I do know, for example, about their public housing program, for instance, is a huge proportion, more than 70%, I think, of their population is housed by the state. And they're planning and renovating and updating and making sure that that's the highest quality houses possible. It's not the last resort. Anticipating growth, buying land, preparing sites, researching on what types of new housing is required, all anticipating the possibilities for their people.
That's a future focus that we need. That's a future mindset
that we need. You can
only
dream, can't you?
Perfect segue into your book, Future Practice. You talked about in that one about the crisis of relevance.
Yeah.
In architecture. I really hope we're going to keep building, though. I'm a believer in buildings.
Good. I mean, good question. So there's a bit to unpack there, I guess. What I saw and this sort of constant refrain, this constant complaint from architects was, we want to be in charge. We want to be at the centre again. We want to make more money. We want to be able to tell everybody what to do. And meanwhile, over the decade, and that was probably true. The great Dutch architect Matthias Bouw has this idea which he calls peak architecture. The moment, was there ever a good old days? If there was a good old days, it was 1949. Mies van der Rohe designing the Seagram Tower in New York, where he did the whole building on 10 sheets of paper. He got paid twice what we get paid today, where you're producing thousands of pieces of paper. He had direct contact with the client, and everybody else bent over to do his bidding for him. Today, it's like totally the opposite. The architect is one among many collaborators. Largely, the builder and project managers have more impact. The voice of the architect is nothing compared to the other experts like engineers or cost consultants or whoever else, the hundreds of consultants involved. And architects are saying, we want to be back at the centre again. And I just thought it was so pathetic and so sort of misunderstanding both the reality of where things are at and the reasons behind the increasing complexity, which are good ones, which are ones of safety and technology and climate and engineering. And you can take all those things away, and what you're left with is Grenfell Tower. And the other reason that I was annoyed by their complaining is that they seem to misunderstand what it is that we do. And what's really at the centre and the possibility of architecture is not even the designing of the building, but it's the cultural, poetic story and future that you bring. Nobody else, none of those other people in that list of consultants has any claim to that. Of the example I gave of the Sydney Opera House, of capturing the kind of mood and future of a progressive nation trying to shrug off its old self. No engineer can conceive of that.
Exactly.
That's the positive public cultural narrative that only architects can do. And I didn't hear anybody just being excited about that.
Yes.
And I wanted to kind of remind everybody, like, this is an amazing thing that you can do. This, only you can do it. Let's remember it and let's draw a circle around it and defend it and remember how amazing and important it is. And everything else flows from that. That's the other thing, is if you've got a powerful vision, if you can plant a flag up ahead and tell people where we ought to be going, there's a lot of people that will want to follow you.
Yeah.
And
that's the power of good design.
Exactly. Yeah. And the power of storytelling, so this is how I run my studio. What I teach my students is it's the story. Yeah. My old boss in Rotterdam, Winnie Maas, he used to say architecture is persuasion. Yeah. He didn't say architecture is designing buildings. He didn't say architecture is walls, meeting roofs, meeting stairs, meeting doors. He says it's the story that you tell that convinces people to do what you want. And you can look at it cynically and say, oh, okay, you're manipulating people. Or you can look at it positively and say, no one else is doing that persuading. What a great opportunity.
You're uniting people. You're bringing them together around a common goal, a common idea, especially with super complicated public projects, large stakeholder groups. Everyone's got ambitions and ideas and opinions. And it's the architect that brings that together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And brings those huge teams together.
And so it gets tricky where you sort of, you don't want to defend people, I don't know, this is where I sort of clash with places like institutes of architects, because they think what I'm saying is defend the architect, let them have more of a fee. And I'm like, no, forget what it is that we do, reconceive it around these goals, and and it may look very different. You're not going to be hoarding draftspeople.
Yeah.
You're not going to be protecting title, through registration and professional membership. You're going to be a storyteller. Yeah. I'm getting excited. I'm swinging my hands around.
It's great. And when you can protect those fees and protect those titles and protect all those good important things by first advocating for the value of good design and doing that well and communicating it, right? Then you can retain all those things that you want to protect because people appreciate why it's important.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think that's broadly right. It gets more complicated when it hits the ground of unionisation and fee agreements, and that's a whole other different discussion. But the principle here is yes, we stand for culture. I think is something we need to remember.
I want to ask, what does good design mean to you?
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, at the moment, all of my projects have co-design in it. And so we've just put in a big bid to the Australian Research Council with half a dozen partners, and it's called Co-Designing Housing for First Nations Prosperity, and it's working with Yorta Yorta Elders in Shepparton and Arup and Jackson Clements Boroughs and all different design and development partners. And the answer to that good question of what is good design in that context is, well, we're going to sit down and we're going to work on it with you, and we're going to ask you the question. Uncle Paul Briggs, who's the elder there, says, for too long, our community has been given housing, it's been given social housing or whatever it is, and been told to be grateful. No one's stopped to ask us what it is that we need or how it could be used to allow us to connect to country or connect to our community or support the challenges and the opportunities that we want to do. So good design is, at the moment for me, like listening and paying attention and working with people to develop it together.
I love that. I love it also how you say at the moment, because it's an evolving thing for you, isn't it, as it probably is for many practitioners, but you're very cognizant about how it's evolving and changing over time for you.
Yeah, I mean, the answer, if I'm talking to my students, is a different one, because we don't have a community that we can work with, and maybe that's something that we need to think about as a school, how you can do more of that engaged type of practice as a kind of rehearsal for how you ought to be working when you do graduate and go out into the world. With them, good design starts with bad design. So it's one of my mantras is, when students come in with a very precious drawing and they've worked on it all week and they pin it up and they wait, all they're wanting is my approval, and I say, no, you've got the dynamic wrong. You're looking for your own approval. You need to be happy with this. It doesn't matter what I think. I give you permission to do it badly. Like, you're being too precious. Do it badly and ask a question. Why is it bad? Or we'll help you answer that question. But pretend it's someone else's drawing when you pin it up, and we just say, okay, why is this bad? Or why is it good? I also nominate a student to give feedback and say, tell us one thing that you love about this project, before we get into the discussion. Yeah. So that's the answer for my students is a different one.
And it becomes personal, doesn't it? Also, depending on the audience, everyone's own understanding of good design will be different. But people always know what bad design is.
Well, even then, as I was saying, this long argument I had with this friend in Sydney about the National Museum, he just assumed that I would hate it, and it took me half an hour to defend it. So this is why I'm very cautious of defining good design, because I think that it's something which, well, not only is it subjective, but we need to keep our minds open. Even when we think we hate something, ask the question and go and look at it, and before you take judgment. Or even better, ask somebody who works there or ask somebody who lives there and see what they think about it.
So true.
Yeah.
So true. And how different buildings are in person when you travel and experience them in reality, not just in those glossy magazines, and see the ecosystem of people, and sometimes if they're famous, the selfies and everything that's going on around that building, how different it is for the experience.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
And Architects After Architecture, your most recent book.
Yeah.
That's a scary title. It definitely ruffled a few feathers.
So the idea with that one was quite simple, really, which was to say there's a whole lot of people who studied architecture or started working in architecture and then left to do something else. If you're being very strict about the definition of architect, they're no longer architects. They've left. They can't be members of the institute. They're banished. I'm exaggerating, but
they've left the green Elysian fields.
Yeah, you're dead to us. This is a book I did with Roberta McCutcheon and Harriet Harris, and we asked the question, but what are they really doing? And isn't it kind of interesting? And aren't they still actually doing architecture but only in a different way or with a different product or subject? Let's go and speak to them and understand what it is that they do. Or maybe we can end up with a sort of more generous, inclusive, inviting definition of the profession. Yeah, stretch the boundary, which is currently a fortress that defends. I never got registered, so I can't call myself an architect, even though this is the only thing I've been thinking about for 30 years. That's the defensive wall. And, I understand that there's good reasons for it. I can't just call myself a doctor either. I can't just, no one wants that. But equally, all of these people who are working in these different ways, we wanted to welcome them back in to the group. And so, for example, Miriam Bellard, who studied architecture in New Zealand, now is the lead environmental designer for video games like Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead Redemption. It's no exaggeration, like tens of millions of people play her in her environments, in her spaces every day. She's like more well-known than or more experienced than any of the architects. You can't get 10 million people through the Guggenheim. And yet nobody knew who she was, and she'd never been asked to speak at an architecture school. So when we hosted her at Pratt in New York, she said, "This is great. I've never been asked to speak in an architecture school." And that was a great example of somebody who, we really ought to be learning from. And her types of, design for working on these games.
Wow.
Over years and years and years. So, and then other people like artists or activists or curators or, people go into government. We wanted to understand how it is that they use their architecture training in the new things that they do.
Naturally, I completely love that, because maybe perhaps half my guests on the program so far in 90 Conversations have had either architectural or interiors or some form of design training or experience that has taken them on different paths. And often it's that architectural training that gives them the clearest assessment and ability to reflect on their own work and the clearest drive and the path forward.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think that's that was something we also were able to do almost at the end of it, was to ask, well, what's the thing that's common then across all of these people? You take away the object of the building as the focus. And what architects are really good at doing is, for example, we've talked about planting a flag ahead. There's very few disciplines are very focused on the propositional.
Yeah, on the future and what you're creating. Exactly. And that hope and optimism, right?
Really good at collaborating. You're constantly working with big complex teams and lots of different forms of knowledge. And so being the kind of integrator, synthesizer of different forms of knowledge is something that, again, is you're able to abstract that into different contexts. We're really good at thinking of different scales. You're thinking of what this thing is going to look like on the horizon as much as how two bits of, a piece of metal meets a piece of wood. And you're thinking of those two things at the same time, and etc. So we were able to kind of list what these qualities are, and they're very different from the way that you might describe a good architect. They're really good at interiors. They're really good at detailing. They're really good. No. We're good. We're also good at talking. That's the other thing, I think. Like the 5 years of every week in architecture school, getting up to present your work makes you an incredible communicator in that 8 minutes that you get to present. And if, by the end of 5 years, even the most anxious, nervous, poor presenter will have some amazing skills at doing that. Yeah.
This book captures so many remarkable stories. Did you have anyone then respond back to you and write back to you and say, you've inspired me to change my whole career? Has anyone taken any massive turns that you know of?
Yeah. I mean, I not to, I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing, but I get these emails all the time, like literally all the time, every week. I've just read your book and I'm starting a PhD and can we have a coffee because it's really based on these ideas? Or we met some guys in London who started a practice after reading Future Practice, and they said, we wanted to make it like multi-layered, so it's a cafe and we're doing architecture at the same time. And I went and had a coffee and I walked out thinking, I don't think this is a good idea. I feel kind of responsible. So there's people kind of misusing it as well, which is all part of it. But or I get somebody ringing up from, the remotest part of WA saying, conversations from the edge. Well, I'm really on the edge and this all made sense to me because the stuff that's different than working in the centre or something. Yeah.
Well, when you put an idea out into the world, you really don't know where it's going to travel, where it's going to go. And you put it out there with this blessing, but in a way you lose control of it, don't you? To the listener who just tried to send us a picture, we don't have the technology to open it up and have a look. So send us a text message, send us your writing if you'd like to join the conversation. The text line is 0493 213 831. And if you miss those numbers, just hit the contact us on Instagram at Radio Architecture. I'm sure Rory would love to answer your question. Get that through to us listeners. We only are on the air for another 12 minutes still for this program. What do you reckon then the next step in that future that for your students, for this co-design that we're really coming into and we're living the question, I think, as a profession? We don't have all the answers yet. We're living the question on how to design with country, how to represent country, how to truly co-design and consult and collaborate with First Nations communities. How do you see the kind of future frontier and where we're headed?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I work closely with Dan Hill, who's friend, boss, collaborator at the school, and we were chatting about this the other day, and we sort of came to the conclusion, like we actually do know enough now that maybe we're prepared to draw the line, or to at least propose an alternative in a substantial way to the sort of mess that we're making in the way that we're building cities at the moment. So far, I think we've been quite reactive, responding to proposals, getting on board with things which are in train, trying to make the best of things that are out there, or working with institutions, governments, and so on in what they're doing. And I think actually, in order to go to the next level, we just need to say, right, this is how a city could be conceived, or this is the type of housing that we really need now. This is how we could address a housing crisis, in a multifaceted way. Architecture in the centre, but also looking at governance and taxes and, public investment and public purpose. And it's sort of, so I think that's, I don't know where to begin or how to do it, but I think what's next is to be braver, to be more ambitious, to stop letting others dictate the terms, and to actually, set out an alternative vision. Yeah.
Where do you think the balance of power in terms of who could and who should be driving that currently sits?
Yeah, I mean, certainly co-design would be baked into that process. So it wouldn't necessarily be, I've got all the answers, here they are. That never worked. Print out a big report. They only all that they do is sit on shelves. But equally, at the moment, the future is being determined by 2 or 3 house builders who are building the same crap that they have been for 50 years. We don't hold them to that standard, Metricon or, Dennis Homes or whoever.
Yes.
All they're doing is building things they know they can sell and they know they can make money out of. And it's a terrible way to build a city. So, yeah, we're gonna look at the demographics. We're going to work with people. We're going to break down the need and the opportunity, and just sort of, suburbs is a big focus. I've been kind of thinking about it without having said that word, but I think that's a big challenge of Melbourne at the moment is how to wrestle with the future of the suburbs.
And our massive urban sprawl, we're 100 kilometres east to west.
It's less dense, more sprawly than LA.
That's wild to think about. And I think we need those
and more
comparisons.
unaffordable as well. So, the crisis is real. And I just think decision makers sitting in the Swanson Street in Zone 1, so it's far disconnected from that reality of... I was on ABC the other morning, and there was a guy who was on before me talking about his commute. He leaves the house at 4 a.m. in order to avoid the traffic, and then he gets to his work at 6 or something and has a 2-hour nap in the car before going into the office.
That's horrendous.
There are thousands of people who do that every day in this city, and we don't hear those voices, and we continue to sort of build the same old bad city.
But that's a health crisis. Talk about
Exactly.
Maslow's foundational needs, right? Good housing, good cities set us up for a healthy, happy, successful life. To pay the same taxes to keep building the cities. I worry about this poor individual who shared a story. The health outcomes of getting up 2 hours earlier, napping in the car. What a derailment.
Well, it's so miserable but it also, you realise that it's the home and its location and its connection to transport that dictates your whole life. Yeah. So let's say this guy, has kids and a partner. Well, they're not going to be able to work, are they? They're going to have to stay at home in order to do the school run. And so therefore you've got this kind of reinforcing as well of these 1950s gender stereotypes. And they may not want that. They may not even come from a culture where that's normal.
Yeah.
But they now, surprise, welcome to Melbourne. That's how you've got to run your life. Get up at 4 and your partner has to be a housewife. It's so sort of upside down that we let the way that we build cities dictate our social progress as well.
This is also the manifestation of architecture and buildings and planning being about ideas.
Yes.
Because that idea gets baked in, that regressive way of living gets baked in if you don't design better, if you don't change it. I want to ask, do you think we're going to have a federal government architect one day?
Oh, that's a good question. I've never even considered it. I mean, I think that we have federal ministers for housing, do we? sort of.
Yes.
Yeah. Why not? Yeah, I think as long as it was broad enough in its scope that, cities or...
Well, we have a chief scientist. We have a chief
I like
medical
it.
officers,
I like it.
medical officers, chief scientists, all these other noble professions that shape the future and the well-being of 24 million people. Shouldn't architects be part of that conversation?
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, yeah. I wonder who it could be.
Maybe one of the current government architects could step
that's
up.
right,
That would certainly
exactly.
qualify them well to step up from
That's
state
right.
level to federal.
There's some really powerful women across the whole country, actually.
Talented and amazing.
Yeah,
Just got awarded as well.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just awarded by the Institute of Architects for their tremendous work.
No, exactly. Good idea.
I'm mindful of the time, so I want to ask one of my last questions, and that's, what gives you hope?
Oh, thanks, Ilana. Oh, I mean, I know it's a cliche, but like genuinely, my students do give me hope. You know, if you're ever feeling jaded or like fed up or hopeless that things can't change, like I encourage you to teach, because like hope is alive there in the schools, passion is alive, like things mattering is alive.
Yes.
My students who wrestle with and fight with themselves and with each other over how to do things.
Yes.
There's no she'll be right in that room. Yes. And if there is, it's quickly challenged by others. So yeah, that's a great source of hope. I love that part of my job.
Hope as a muscle.
Being in the studio.
Hope as a muscle too, and a machine, and we have to keep flexing it and keep exercising.
Yeah, and we've got to give those ideas places to go, an opportunity. So that's the other thing that I would hope is part of this is, trusting young people again that they know what they're doing. You shouldn't have to be 50, 60 before you get a big commission.
True. And creating those opportunities, and maybe it's how the housing board used to work in the 80s and 90s that spurred the career of so many amazing architects. This conversation's come full circle now at the mention of Edmund and Corrigan again, who got one of their first breaks doing K Street housing.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we looked into this a lot in the UK, and I did an exhibition on the future of social housing. And one of the people we spoke to was Kate McIntosh, who designed, one of the most spectacular public housing developments in South London. And, I was like, well, first of all, you're alive, from building that in the 1960s. And you're sort of like still super engaged and out doing things and writing and giving tours. And yeah, because she was 24 when she got that project.
Yeah.
And it was for, 500 units across a huge site. Like, it's unthinkable. Yeah.
And I'm thinking, UK had quite a strong culture, actually, of commissioning young architects, with Peter and Alison Smithson were in their early 20s, publishing, writing, quite formidable in their leadership too, weren't they?
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, and you could say, oh, well, that was then. But equally, why not again? Yeah, it happened then. It was within a lifetime. We can recover the public purpose, the public architect, the giving opportunities to young people who are then surrounded by incredible experts and knowledge to deliver their great thesis project. I think that the work that comes out of our school is as better or as good as anything else that's coming out of practice. Yeah.
Because it still has all those dreams, all those hopes.
Yeah.
All the ideas are
and it's
still
not
thriving.
burdened by this is how we always do it. That's the biggest brick on top of creativity is business as usual. Yeah.
I'm going to allow myself one more last
Please.
question, because I truly can't help myself, and I'm milking every minute of this conversation that we have on air. Who's been the biggest inspiration or guide or mentor or drive for you?
Oh, I've had so many. I've been so lucky for that. somebody who's really important and a good friend is Stuart Harrison, who we did the radio show together, and he taught me at RMIT. Dan Hill at the moment, but also Lily, who was my art teacher, who put me onto architecture, who I was, still texting this afternoon, Lily Randall. Liza Fior from Muff was a, aggravator and a challenger, but like a huge support, would invite us over for Christmas dinner, So, I count myself so lucky to have had so many great formal and informal mentors, encouraging me along the way.
In the amazing ecosystem of practice that has shaped your own and that you continue to shape and create and guide for others. Thank you so much, Rory, for joining me on the program this
Thanks,
evening.
Ilana.
Thanks for joining me for another evening of Radio Architecture with Ilana Razbash. This live show was broadcast and recorded in the Radio Karim studio on Bunurong Country. You can replay the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and supporting community radio. Take care.
Hi, this is Naomi Libba, composer and vocalist. I'm here at Radio Karim. They rock.